Welcome back to the Work-Inspired Podcast, 𝗧his Podcast with Rav Gerzi. We'd like to welcome our Torah Anytime listeners and our listeners tuning in from around the world. So today's podcast is a funny one, the truth is, because I think everyone, would like to say, you listen to our podcast, you watch our podcast, we have all the answers. And today's podcast topic is about how our podcast really just isn't enough. Because the truth is that we've hinted through this. Like we've used all different types of jokes. It was like scratching the surface. There was dipping the toes in the swimming pool, of trying to get across this idea that while what we've been discussing here in the context of this podcast is important, and there are discussions that need to be had within the Torah community, really it's not really giving justice, because when it comes to the topics of Parnassa, when it comes to the topics of money, wealth, work, job, career, what's really needed, right, for each person is to be able to learn this topic properly, meaning to take a look in depth, to be able to see the marmakomos, which is really something that we try to do with all of Torah, right? It's a question that could be asked, especially today, in our times where we're gifted, 𝗀𝗃 Hashem, right, that we're able to have access, so many people are able to have access to svarim. They give over, the bottom line halacha, right? To be able to give the 𝗀𝗽liche or summaries of ideas or avodas, right? And then there's a question of, perhaps that's enough, right? Or perhaps that's really not enough. It's good, it's valuable, but there are different halakim of Torah. And in order to be able to understand any topic of Torah, we really need to be able to look at it in depth. What do you have to say?
A lot.
Okay, well,
a lot.
We're going to scratch the surface on this topic too.
We're going to scratch the surface, excavate a little bit. So, one thing that I learned from a very, very early age, and it's in fact how I try to share whatever I have to say. I have a big mouth, I like to speak, so I have to make mesudar what I want to share so it can be digested and it can become real in the person. But I think that's one of the key points. How do you really change? How do you really change? Like, where does change come from? And it's interesting because we live in a door of likutim. Everything is likutim this, likutim that, likutim the other. And there's a milah to it. There is a milah because mitzad achad, the inyan of like having a likud of something will bring a flavor of that which you are wanting to examine and understand. Yet it's not the full story. And the downfall is that you'll never have a proper hasaga, you'll never have a proper 𝗧his, you'll never own, 𝗧his is to own, you'll never own that topic. So a likud is little bits about a particular subject. So a likud is, how do you translate likud? How do you translate likud?
Like collection?
A collection. Likud, a collection?
Yeah.
A collection. So you have a collection, on a particular subject, but it's not the whole subject. And you'll never know the whole subject if you don't dedicate some time to that subject. Yet, on the other hand, there's a lot out there. So the way that my teachers really presented to me a way of understanding Torah is that you have to be able to really break down in a methodical way, and then that which is important, go into it and understand it from a deeper perspective. And there are things that you could leave more to the side, but you've had a touch of it. One of my teachers who was just nifta, his name was Rav Yosef Lieberman, the Mishnah Yosef. And I sat, 𝗀𝗃 Hashem, hours and hours and hours. He was nifta 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I think he was nifta. And he was nifta on Shabbos. And he was a person, when I sat with him and when we spoke about inyanim of halacha, inyanim of Torah, he would always say that likutim are really good to give you an introduction to something. And then, if that particular subject is important, or if it interests you, when you go into it, you have to go into it properly. And in fact, this is how I like to teach. Any subject that we have, say for example, on YouTube, we have, 𝗀𝗃 Hashem, a lot of series on YouTube going up, and just over the years, the different series that we gave, what we try to do is as following. I find it's very effective. What is that? Say, for example, we're giving a series on tefillah. We give a series on tefillah. So, in regards to a series on tefillah, there's, 30, 40 hours. Each share is an hour and a half. But an hour and a half it's very long for a person if they're not fully dedicated to it, but they want that information. So we had like 100 and something 5-minute overviews of each share.
Right.
So we live in a generation where we have a lot out there, more than ever before. And on top of that, we want to experience different chalakim of Torah. We want to experience different parts of Torah. People don't know what's out there. And there's a lot of compelling information out there that can upgrade your life. Yet, on the other hand, there is a danger of being superficial. There's only so many likutim we can read without understanding a fuller context-based, understanding of the subject. And what we've suggested before, and we'll suggest now, really, there are only a few places in life that you really have to master.
What do you mean by that?
There's a few paces of life, few places, a few areas of your life that we really have to master. So, for example, if we look at the 𝗀𝗚liche his𝗀𝗍, so you've got financial and physical health, physical and financial health. That, if you want to live a good life, master it. We look at relationships. Master relationships. We look at how the mind works. In our Torahs on how the mind works. When we give shiurim, so many times I hear the conversation. I wish I knew this 30 years ago. I went to shul, I went to school, and I was in yeshiva. I wish somebody taught me how to use my memory. K'pshutai, talk about guidance and ruchnius. Guidance. These are musts, really, that we should master. And for so many people, they dabble in it. When we've got another segment in our education platform where we label it dat, the architecture of the soul. That's a mastery over self. So, for example, you can have lots of wealth, but if you are fed up and annoyed and you are triggered by people, you can have so much wealth, but you're miserable. Or a person could be, for example, as my grandfather would say, there's no point being the richest person in the graveyard. A person could be a genius and know kol Torah kulai, yet they can have the worst midas. So there's only a few areas that we need to master and not leave as a likud. And when we are sharing these Torahs, for example, for Rabbi Singer, where he received this tradition from his great-great-great-grandfather, the 𝗀𝗀𝗵𝗺 and the Degel Machne Ephraim, there was a reality where what we want to do is recognize, just as in all 𝗀𝗀liche Torah, there's a general understanding of what it is, but then there's a masterful approach in sitting with the materials, sitting with the texts, reading the Gemara inside, not just listening to me quote a Gemara, but open up a Gemara, look at it, then think about it, look at the Rashi, look at the 𝗀𝗏is, look at the Rishonim, the Achreinim, and go be'iyun and own it. Because the truth is that when you go into a text in depth, when you go into a subject in depth, it becomes more part of you. And even just having the conversations change you. When you, for example, when we speak about emunah, when we're speaking about bitachon, when we're speaking about dveikus, when we're speaking about makaros of work, whatever it may be, the more we have those nutritious conversations, it does go in. It does go in. If you repeat, to be b'dveikus in what you are doing, and you pick one area, so right now this is work inspired. So yes, when you sit down at your desk about to work, 𝗀𝗀𝗵𝗺, I'm mamish being megala HaKadosh Baruch Hu in an or that otherwise wouldn't be megala. And you hear that again and again, and you read texts, you learn the Chazal, you learn the Sfarim HaKadoshim, it becomes more of you and it becomes more natural. When I sit down, this is what I do. So learning be'iyun, and it's a whole conversation what be'iyun is. It's not just a bekias on mefarshim, but thinking about it, asking questions, challenging, thrashing something out, opening it out, really excavating that it's part of you, it will change you.
Right.
And that's what's needed. Hashem has invited us to be curious, to be reporters, to be inquisitive, and really delve deep into Torah and ask those tension point questions. Well, what does that mean? wow, that's interesting. How does that work?
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating. I know that that word, dabbling into a topic is something that the Rebbe's spoken about, and it was something that Rav Singer, the Pilzno Rav felt very passionate about, because it's interesting is that when it comes to Torah, right, we know, as people that, just don't want to, know a little bit about Chumash, know a little bit about halacha, know a little bit, about a topic, right? It comes to so many areas. We want to be able to know the halacha, but people are looking for more, right? They want to be able to understand, the Ma'armakom. They want to be able to understand what the Rishonim say. They want to be able to see the 𝗀𝗃𝗃 of, the pasuk, down into Torah 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃, and it's a beautiful process for anyone that's had the opportunity to be able to learn halacha be'iyun, right? It's just a beautiful process of not just learning halacha separately and then learning Gemara separately, but when you're able to look at a topic and to be able to see, wow, that halacha in the Mishnah Berurah, I know the pasuk enough. I know the pasuk where that came from.
Exactly.
And that really what's going on over there, is that machlokas, between the Magen Avraham, right? That's really a machlokas that boils down to the Rishonim, which goes back, and it's really creating a beautiful masterpiece. And what it does is creates a deep relationship with the learning. But when it comes to these areas of the 𝗀𝗃𝗃 {HaYesodot}, which are really so much fundamental to the human experience, right? That each one of us are going through life, right? Dealing with Parnassa, dealing with their physical health, dealing with relationships, dealing with the way that we learn, right? Dealing with guidance, right? For so many people, it's, well, how much do I know about that? Well, I heard a Musar idea, or, I saw a Dvar Torah, on a Parsha sheet, or maybe, I saw an idea, so 𝗀𝗃, and the idea was, no, this is an area of Torah that we need to be 𝗀his, we need to acquire for ourselves. And
I want to share with you, you just reminded me of something. I brought a Talmud Chacham who's very overweight, and he wasn't doing well. And we went to Rabbi Yosef Lieberman. I spoke to him, I told him about health. And I've got a shut. I spent a long time speaking to Rabbi Yosef Lieberman, the one of my teachers, as I mentioned, who was just nifta, and he was a walking Musar sefer. He understood things in context and mamash to the source. He really was a person who owned everything that he learned. He sat with it. He thought about it. And I took this individual and to speak to Rabbi Yosef Lieberman, because his question was, show me where Torah speaks about health, but more than just protecting your health, which unfortunately this individual did not do, being, what's the word I'm looking for? Being proactive. Thank you. Being proactive. I went to Rav Elyashiv, and I asked Rav Elyashiv a question. When we have the pasuk shomer nafshecha, that you have to protect your health, it's guarding. It's guarding. So I had a taich that in our generation, if you are not actually proactive, you are not guarding. Which I got the response, Efsha. It could be. Rav Elyashiv says, yes, you have to be proactive. Efsha, maybe Shamar Nefshecha now takes on as well a proactive role. Now remember, this Yid sat with Reb Lieberman, and Reb Lieberman said that I see fundamentally you don't understand the relationship of what the guf is in Yiddishkeit. So Rabbi Lieberman said, I see that something which is so important, you don't have a 𝗀𝗃𝗃, you don't own it. I can show you in Nista that the guf is a matana, but as well in nigla. And he proceeded for an hour and a half to share with him Makoros, to open up this sugya, open up this area, showing that the guf does not belong to you. The guf is on loan. And one of the shalas 𝗀𝗃𝗃 I have in shalas 𝗀𝗃𝗃 𝗀𝗃, I have this whole conversation. I asked the question, and Rabbi Lieberman sent me an answer. Does the body belong to you? And Rabbi Lieberman said, so many people are walking around because they don't have mastery on this most fundamental, they abuse their body.
Wow, it's a beautiful story, and just gives an example. Here's a Talmud Chacham, right, and people that are dedicating so much time to Torah, but these fundamental areas, the 𝗀𝗃𝗃 is something which could be left out. And I'm not at all saying I have it and other people don't. I know from just my own personal story, when I went through this, I shared more of my full story on our opening podcast of my transition of coming into this topic of work and trying to gain clarity for myself at that point to try to be able to understand it. Like, I remember that it was transformational, because as I went on this journey of learning 𝗲 𝗀𝗻𝗺 and saying, look, I'm right now going to be involved in work, going to be involved in finance. Like, I want to understand what the Torah has to say about this, more than just like a cute idea or just something that I, grasped, noted in the Sefer, and really started to really excavate it. What I found for myself was, first of all, I saw there were these 𝗲 𝗀𝗻𝗺 that I'd never seen before. Right, and I was like, wow, really? Does he say that? And you start to open up, and we're not just talking about these rare 𝗲 𝗀𝗻𝗺. We're talking about the Tanoim, Amoraim, Mishnahs, Gemaras, Midrashim within the Rishonim, and seeing really look what's being spoken about in terms of our attitudes and in terms of the way that we approach making money, how we approach being in the workplace. Right, and actually giving 𝗧hs and advice and strategies, and it was really eye-opening for me to see really how this is something that the Torah dealt with. And then there were also these 𝗲 𝗀𝗻𝗺 that I came across when I was exploring. The 𝗲 𝗀𝗻𝗺 I had seen before, but when I was looking at it under this context, it was like, wow, like I may have read this Mishnah, I may have read this Chazal, and it was that just didn't speak to me that way. But now that I was in that place of learning this sugya and being somebody who was out there in the workplace and involved in finance, it was a game changer.
Can I share something on this? I'll never forget this nakuda of what you're saying. Learning be'iyun isn't just learning lots of commentaries on the Gemara. Like we said, there could be a bekias on Rashi, 𝗀𝗧his, Rishonim, Achronim. There could be a bekias. We just read them. Learning be'iyun for my teachers was very much 𝗀𝗨𝗕, and probably 𝗀𝗨𝗕 was the clearest one in articulating this. He would say like this, that you could read a text 8, 9, 10, 11 times, and because you just read it and didn't think about it, you didn't sit with it, you didn't close your eyes, and you weren't misbeinen on it, that you don't 𝗀𝗻 the profundity of the text. So, for example, one that comes to mind, somebody came to Rabbi Singer, 𝗀𝗨𝗕, and we were speaking about work, and whether he should stay in learning or go to kollel. And on this person's matzav, the context of this person, Rabbi 𝗀𝗨𝗕 said, go and keep on working. And he quoted him the Gemara Brachos Daf Lev. 4 things that you have to strengthen. And the last one is Parnassa. Torah, Avodah, Chesed, and Parnassa. And the person says, I know that Gemara. I know the Gemara. And 𝗀𝗨𝗕 said to him, you haven't heard the Gemara. You haven't. Sit with it. Sit with it. And he sat with it for a few moments. He realized, Torah, Avodah, Chasadim, and Parnassa? He says, now you have. All he did was sit with the Gemara, just think it's like, whoa, what, really? And that nakuda of just, as you said, we could read a text and we didn't think about it. And it becomes so beautiful because when, for example, you look through a text and then you read and like, really? It just said that? That's wild. Sometimes it's, for example, I was talking to somebody this morning, an 𝗪𝗪 Yid, and he's bothered by the places where, for example, the Rabbanon say, if a person did this and this, they should be strike down and die. And like we could just read through it, goes, but no, he's bothered. It triggers him. That there's a be'iyun, like, whoa, what's going on here? And I think what you're saying is so real, so powerful, that you in your journey, you're a person who really thinks about something. It's beautiful. That's why I love working together. Challenging. And you took something, wow, it really says that? That's weird. That's odd. What does that mean? I've never noticed that before, even though I've read it 300 times. And it moves you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story that really explains. I know it's a big topic in terms of Rebbe's hinted, bekias versus be'iyun, because there's things we threw out these phrases, learning bekias seder, be'iyun seder, and what we're hearing over here, is that to learn something be'iyun, right, means it's a person sitting with information and reflecting on it to be able to internalize it, and that is what happened, in my story, and it was something that was also very interesting for me personally, and this is something that we've spoken about in the past, which was paying attention to who were the tzaddikim, who were the Tanoim Amoraim that were giving over the teachings. Because what it did for me as somebody who is hitting the workplace was that I may have thought before, what is my connection at all with, Reb Meir, with Reb Shimon Bar Yochai? Like, okay, these are tzaddikim, these are people that are in the base medrash. That works well. I can feel connected to these tzaddikim, when I'm in my daf yomi, when I'm learning in my seder in the morning, when I'm at my night seder. But when I hit the office, when I'm at my work, when I'm dealing with all of finances and taking care of all these things, what's the connection between me and them? And it was a mind-blowing experience where it was a reorientation of, like, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he was extremely wealthy. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and really going through and recognizing and seeing how I'm able to connect with the limud, and it changed my learning as well, because then when I was learning and seeing these different tzaddikim coming up, it helped me understand when they were sharing what they were sharing about different aspects of Torah, different aspects of life. These are people that also had an understanding of work. These are people that also had what to share. And 𝗧h𝗛𝗃 חיים and 𝗧h𝗃 Torah about Parnassa, Elazar ben Azariah, right? All the different mamarim that we have.
It has halachic ramifications. It's more than that. Their wealth, they weren't just wealthy. Wealth as a nasi, wealth as a leader, has halachic ramifications. Like, whoa, did you ever think, if they didn't have the wealth, they would put the wealth into his account?
Right, yeah, it's one of the topics we've spoken about. It's
wow.
Yeah, and it's all of these ideas are just really something that, for somebody who's trying to understand the topic and make it relevant, it's like, wow, that's just like a notification that's gone off, that there's something here for me to be able to explore. And, it's something which ultimately, as Rebbe said, the goal of what we want to achieve, right, as Yidden, and not just as work-inspired Yidden, we all should be work-inspired Yidden, but just Yidden is that every piece of Torah that we learn should be something which infiltrates into our being. So when we're speaking over here, right, about discussions of Parnassa, discussions about work, about career, it's not just a nice idea, it's not about Torah, right? It's the idea that when you're sitting at your work desk, right, it's going to change the way, right, that you press send on your email. It's going to change the way that when you're sitting with your, with your spreadsheets, with your finances, when you're making decisions how to spend your money, when you're having discussions with your spouse, right, when you're choosing to go on vacation, when you're choosing to spend money there, right, when you're choosing what job, like day to day, not just the big decisions, your day-to-day decisions, it's going to infiltrate into your being. And the only way that that's going to take place, right, as Rebbe said, is that when that little action that you're doing is connected to something which is deeper. It's not just connected to a likud. It's not just connected to a nice idea you heard in the 𝗀𝗃𝗫𝗀 podcast. Even though these discussions are important, and we've created this podcast because of the recognition that there's so many people that either don't think that Torah has what to say about these topics, right? Or people that are wondering, and they may be having these conversations on the quiet, and they're like, well, who's talking about these things? But there's a recognition that in order for us to be able to be changed, that this needs to be connected to the whole way that we learn Torah, the way that Torah makes that change. Right? And Rebbe speaks about often, we've had conversations about the Musar movement.
Yes.
What did the Musar movement do? The Musar movement, when we speak about change, we speak about avodas. The question is, how did that work?
So this is actually very exciting. This is very, very exciting. Why it's exciting is because there is a vision that Yoshua Gerzi has had based on his teachers for a long time already. And this is living it out. And what is that? For example, first of all, Yoshua Gerzi's inner wanting is to upgrade people's lives, that people deserve to live fully engaged, to live a good, healthy, wonderful, and wondrous life. You hear that very, very often from me. Is it something which is a dream, or is it something that we could bring down? And we've worked over the last 20-something years, worked with probably hundreds of thousands of people, and Baruch Shem, the lives are better for it. And it's not difficult. You just have to make sure you spend and dedicate proper time, and yes, certain effort, and it's not so difficult to upgrade your life. For example, to create change, if done in a natural way, is very achievable. So if we look, for example, at the 5 pillars of physical health, so you've got physical health, financial health, 5 pillars. You've got breathing, drinking, sleeping, eating, and movement. So people try to spend a whole lifetime on developing healthy habits for eating and movement, where if we understand the wisdom of Torah tells us, 𝗀𝗪, we've spoken about it, the quickest thing to realize, to make change is breathing. You learn to breathe properly, you learn to drink properly, and then you learn to sleep properly. Sleep is already more of avodah, but breathing and drinking will affect your sleep. That's going to affect your eating habits. That's going to affect your movement. There's a natural progression. And there's a wisdom behind it. And if you stop, and this is how we learn, in the 𝗀𝗪𝗧, for example, in the 𝗀𝗪𝗧, which is based more on the model of the Musa world, that you learn a sugya. You learn a sugya. So you learn the sugya. There's a lot of Torah that speaks about breath, for example. We've already demonstrated there's a lot that speaks about work, but there's a lot of Torah that speaks about breath. I've got a 50-page kuntras, a 50-page booklet on breath. Drinking, there's not so much. A few things here and there. I've got 5 pages on drinking. Sleep, I've got 110 pages just dedicated to sleep. But you sit with the sugyas. You learn them up, you learn them inside, and then you think about them. You have avodas connected to those sugyas. It changes you. It changes you on the inside out. It's so profound. And by the world of Musa, this is how they learned. They would learn a sugya, and they would really sit with a sugya. They would ask the most basic questions, like, am I aware of the profundity of this sugya? Am I aware of it? And then straight away, without wasting time, you don't just leave the wisdom in the text that you are learning. You would go and you would create and develop a avodah to implement what you've learned, to keep it alive, that the Torah becomes you. As the Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us, at first, the Torah is called in Hashem's name, and then the Torah is called in the name that learns her. So there's a Torah called Yoshua Gerzi, there's a Torah called Rav Tzvi. And this is something really, really important. And with all the Arbi Yisodis, what we want to do is to create chaburas where these are the areas that we share, that we suggest, need attention in our door. And not that it should just be a likud, but it should be something that's real, that we could learn the sugyas Torah Lishma, and we can bring that into our life. We can integrate it and have avodas, like in the world of Musa, they would learn a sugya and then they would create an avodah to implement it straight away. Don't waste time. Find the next person to share it with. Find the next opportunity to practice what you've just learned. This is what I learned from my teachers, Rav Mordechai Zuckerman, Reb Shlomo Volby, Reb Yitzchak Grudzinski. This is how they mamash learn. You would learn and spend time with it, read over it, and then you would live it. Find opportunities to live it. So Chasdei Hashem, in our Chabura, which we've been learning, which we've been meeting in the morning for, so we're doing it there. And we need more of it. We need more of it.
I think Rav Gerzi, I think that the concept of Musar, and the Musar Chabur is something which, we've spoken in the past, in different contexts, how we have a hard time relating to what that was. We know there's Musar Seder, there's Musar Sfarim, but what did they really do? And, I know for myself personally, I gained through learning from you was to recognize that there was a process. And the process ended up in avodas, and that's what we need in order to be able to make the change, to be able to put in the hard work. It wasn't just like cute ideas and 𝗀𝗪𝗧his Podcast. It was no
with other people together. You with a group of people,
right? Together with other people,
beautiful,
supportive, creating that community, but work avodas. But what Rabbi's sharing is that sometimes you can just say, okay, I know even for myself, like, okay, everyone, let's get together. Here's 10 things to do. Okay, people start walking out the door. It becomes difficult. I don't have the energy for it. But when those avodas are connected to something that you've learned, something that you've internalized, so then it's part of a natural process. And as Rabbi mentioned, we've had the opportunity, locally in the base medrash, through the work-inspired chabura, right, is to be able to have a chevra of people that are working in different fields. People are entrepreneurs, people working in marketing, people working in data, people that are working, in handy fields, people working in different professions, where they're able to come together and say, it's not just enough to hear inspirational ideas about connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to recognize that I'm okay even if I'm working. This topic of Parnassa, this topic of work, this topic of bills, this topic of money, this topic of wealth, this topic of career, this topic of job, the studies show how many hours of our lives are we going to be spending time doing this. I want to understand and acquire for myself what the Torah has to say.
Hashem, bringing Hashem into it, 100%.
And what it does is that it gives us clarity, and it's given them clarity on fundamental questions of how to look at themselves, to make those decisions, right? To be able to not just survive, but to be able to thrive as a Yid, and even in our generation, even with all the challenges that we have, right, through the workplace and through the Avodah. And what we're doing and what's been done is that through learning the 𝗪 and through having discussions and then having avodas connected to them, that's really the recipe that enables each one of us to really become work inspired. And it's very exciting for us really at this point, as a new initiative of Work Inspired, to be able to launch our global chabura, which is going to be able to give access to people, right, that aren't 𝗧h𝗫 yet to live in Eretz Yisrael, Ramat Beit Shemesh, but people that are around the world, working in different professions, to be able to, not just to get a nice inspirational vart, but really to acquire this part of Torah for their lives, to be able to learn the 𝗪, to be able to get support from other people, to be able to really challenge oneself, challenge one's beliefs about these topics, and really to be able to acquire it. So I think our action point, we like to throw out a question, a challenge for the week, right, is for you to ask yourself, be honest, how much do you feel you have acquired this topic of Torah when it comes to Parnassa, when it comes to money, right? When it comes to job, when it comes to career? How much would you, if you have to compare it to other areas of Torah in your life, areas of the Mo'adim, Torah, Tefillah, right, halacha, whatever it is for you, if you had to compare, where would you say that your current level of acquiring this topic of Torah is? And the second question is, if you've been tuning into the Work Inspired podcast, just ask yourself, you've been listening, you've been inspired, right? It's giving you what to think about, but do you feel that there's more that you could be gaining from, and your ability to be able to really take these ideas, right, and to not be able to share them with other people, to acquire them. And B'ezras Hashem, we're going to be launching our global chabura. Check out, right, the link below, and to check out the more information about it. And we really invite everyone to really, which is really the goal of Work Inspired, is that each one of us in our own way, in our own professions, are able to live uplifted lives, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'ezras Hashem, together.
Amen.